He was a man who had everything: a billion-dollar empire, a pristine reputation, and a beautiful, quiet wife who was the perfect ornament for his life. He thought he could have more. He thought a secret weekend with his young, ambitious mistress at New York's most exclusive five-star hotel was just another perk of his power. He booked the imperial suite, ordered the vintage champagne, and believed he was the king of his universe. But what he didn't know was that while he was checking in with his mistress, his wife wasn't at home planning a charity gala. She was in the penthouse boardroom signing the papers that made her the new queen of his castle. This is the story of how a man's secret getaway became his public downfall. The Rolls-Royce Phantom purred to a stop before the magnificent limestone facade of the Ethelgard Grand Hotel on Central Park South. Richard "Rick" Sterling, a man whose tailored Tom Ford suit cost more than the doorman's monthly salary, felt a familiar surge of power. At 52, his hair was more salt than pepper, but his ambition remained as sharp and black as his polished Oxford shoes. He owned half of the skyline he was currently admiring his name. Sterling Legacy Properties, blazoned discreetly on towers of glass and steel. Beside him, Chloe Summers, all of 26, practically vibrated with excitement. Her blonde hair was a cascade of perfect waves, her dress a sliver of silk that hugged a figure sculpted by Pilates and ambition. She looked at Rick with eyes that reflected his own greatness back at him, a mirror he found intoxicating. "Oh, Rick," she breathed, her hand tightening on his arm. "It's even more beautiful than in the pictures. Only the best for you. My dear," he murmured, his voice a low rumble of satisfaction. He enjoyed this, the unveiling of a world she could only dream of. It affirmed his status, his success. He was not just a man. He was a gatekeeper to paradise. The doorman, a stoic figure in a charcoal greatcoat, opened Rick's door with a deferential nod. "Welcome back, Mr. Sterling." Rick offered a curt nod in return. He was a regular, though usually for business lunches, at the hotel's 3 Michelin-star restaurant brilliance. This was different. This was personal, illicit. He felt a thrill, a dangerous spark, that his placid, predictable life with his wife Eleanor had long since extinguished. Eleanor. The thought of her was a fleeting shadow. He'd left her that morning in their sprawling Greenwich, Connecticut estate. She was arranging flowers, a serene and elegant figure in a cashmere sweater set. She was perfect, a Vance heiress, beautiful, poised, the ideal corporate wife. She ran their charities, hosted his dinners, and never, ever questioned him. Her predictability was both a comfort and a care. He'd told her he had an urgent last-minute board meeting in the city that would run through the weekend. She had simply smiled, kissed his cheek, and wished him luck, her lavender scent a ghost that clung to him for a few miles before being replaced by the heady jasmine of Chloe's perfume. Inside the lobby of the Ethelgard was a cathedral of wealth, a soaring coffered ceiling dripped with colossal baccarat chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of fresh lilies and old money. Marble floors gleamed, and the hushed whispers of the elite echoed softly. Rick strode to the private check-in, a discreet alcove reserved for their most valued clientele. Chloe clung to his arm, her eyes wide. "This feels like a movie." "This is real life, Chloe. My life," he corrected, gently patting her hand. "And soon yours." He had made her promises, of course, vague allusions to a future, a life beyond stolen weekends. He had no concrete plans to leave Eleanor. Divorce was messy, expensive, and terrible for the brand. But Chloe was a vital distraction, a validation of his youth and virility in a world where younger, hungrier sharks were always circling. The concierge, a woman with a practiced, warm smile, greeted them. "Mr. Sterling, a pleasure. We have the Imperial Suite prepared for you. Everything is in order." "Excellent, Maria. You'll be sending up the hall. 82 Petrus." "It is already chilling, sir." As they were handed their keycard, a heavy gold-plated square, a man in a dark suit approached the concierge. He looked flustered, his eyes darting around the lobby. Rick recognized him vaguely as a junior manager. The manager, Mr. Davison, leaned in and whispered urgently to Maria, not realizing Rick's hearing was still sharp. "Is the penthouse boardroom secure? Mr. Croft is on his way up with the final documents. No one is to go to that floor without explicit clearance from him. The new chairwoman is arriving within the hour for the transition meeting." Maria nodded, her professional calm unwavering. "Of course, Mr. Davison. All is under control." Rick's brow furrowed slightly. The Ethel Guard was part of the Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group. He knew old Marcus Vance, its legendary and notoriously ruthless founder, had passed away about 6 months ago. The industry papers were buzzing about a potential hostile takeover by a rival conglomerate. He made a mental note to have his analyst look into it. There might be an opportunity there. But the thought was fleeting. He turned his attention back to Chloe, guiding her toward the private elevators. As the polished brass doors slid shut, enclosing them in their own private world, he leaned in and kissed her, the taste of her lipstick, a sweet promise of the weekend to come. The Imperial Suite was breathtaking. It was less a hotel room and more a palatial apartment with panoramic views of Central Park. A grand piano stood in one corner, a fully stocked bar in another. A bottle of Petrus was nestled in a silver bucket, next to 2 crystal glasses, and a decadent spread of charcuterie cheeses and fruits was laid out on the coffee table. Chloe gasped, spinning around in the center of the living room. "Rick, I'm speechless." "Don't be," he said, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "Get used to it." He nuzzled her neck, inhaling her scent. "I have a small matter to attend to in a bit. A quick meeting. Here in the hotel." "Business," she pouted, turning in his arms. "Of a sort," he said, a sly grin playing on his lips. "Let's call it an acquisition. A little side project I'm considering. A group of investors wants to meet. They think I'm the key to their next big move." His ego was fully inflated. He truly believed they had sought him out for his Midas touch. The meeting was scheduled for 3:00 p.m. in one of the hotel's smaller, more discreet conference rooms, the Concord Room. He'd been approached by a law firm, Croft and Associates, representing an anonymous consortium of investors who he was told held a controlling interest in the Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group. They were looking for a powerful partner, a titan of industry, to join their new board and help steer the company into the future. They had flattered him, appealed to his vanity, and he had taken the bait. The prospect of having a stake in the very hotel chain founded by his father-in-law was a delicious irony he couldn't resist. He checked his Patek Philippe watch. 2:45 p.m. Time to get ready. "You enjoy the champagne," he told Chloe, kissing her forehead. "Order anything you want from room service. I shouldn't be more than an hour." As he adjusted his tie in the grand gilded mirror, he felt invincible. He was Richard Sterling. He had the beautiful young mistress, the vintage wine, the palatial suite, and a lucrative new business deal about to fall into his lap. His wife was miles away, arranging flowers, blissfully unaware. He was the king, and this was his kingdom. Nothing could possibly go wrong. The Concord Room was on the mezzanine level, a space designed for intimacy and discretion. It had no sweeping views, only walls panelled in dark mahogany and adorned with sombre oil paintings of long-dead financiers. A long, polished table dominated the room, set with 12 leather chairs, crystal water glasses and monogrammed notepads. It felt less like a meeting room and more like a tribunal. Rick arrived precisely at 3:00 p.m. He expected to find a room full of eager investors, men in suits like his own, ready to court him. Instead, the room was empty except for one man standing by the window, his back to the door. He was tall and impeccably dressed, with silver hair and a posture that spoke of decades of authority. "Mr. Sterling," the man said, turning around. His face was lean and aquiline, his eyes a piercing blue. Rick recognized him instantly. This was Julian Croft, Marcus Vance's personal lawyer for over 40 years, a legendary legal shark in New York's corporate world. "Julian," Rick said, extending a hand, his confidence momentarily shaken. He hadn't expected to deal directly with the top dog. "I was expecting a consortium." Julian Croft's handshake was firm and cold. His lips barely curved into a smile. "They are on their way. Punctuality is a virtue few seem to possess these days. Please have a seat." Rick took a seat at the head of the table, the position he naturally assumed. Julian remained standing, a silent, imposing sentinel. The quiet in the room was unnerving. Rick was used to controlling the atmosphere, to filling the silence with his own confident patter. But here the silence belonged to Julian Croft. "I trust your accommodations are to your liking," Julian asked, his tone flat, devoid of any real warmth. "The Imperial Suite is magnificent as always," Rick replied smoothly, trying to reclaim his footing. "You and your clients have excellent taste." He was trying to signal that he was an insider, a man of their world. "The Ethel Guard prides itself on a certain standard," Julian said cryptically. "A standard that must be maintained at all costs." The door opened again. This time, it was Mr. Harrison, the general manager of the hotel, a man Rick had known for years. Harrison looked pale, his usual professional bonhomie replaced by a palpable tension. He nodded stiffly at Rick, his eyes avoiding direct contact. He took a seat 2 chairs down from Rick, folded his hands on the table, and stared at them as if they held the secrets to the universe. Now Rick was genuinely confused. Why was the hotel's GM here? This was supposed to be an investment meeting, a discussion of board seats and stock options, not hotel operations. "Is everything all right, David?" Rick asked, addressing the GM directly. Harrison looked up, startled. "Mr. Sterling?" "Yes, everything is proceeding as planned." He glanced nervously at Julian Croft, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The main doors to the Concord room swung open again with a soft whoosh. Rick turned in his chair, a welcoming, powerful smile ready on his lips, expecting to finally see the money men, the anonymous consortium he was here to charm. His smile froze and shattered. Standing in the doorway was his wife, Eleanor. For a disoriented second, his brain couldn't process the image. It was like seeing a character from one movie wander into the wrong film. Eleanor belonged in Greenwich in art galleries, in the passenger seat of her Bentley. She did not belong here, in this room, at this meeting. And she was not the Eleanor he had left that morning. The woman he'd kissed goodbye was dressed in soft dove-grey cashmere. The woman standing before him was a vision of ice and steel. She wore a bespoke Armani power suit in a shade of midnight blue, so dark it was almost black. Her honey-blonde hair, usually worn in a soft chignon, was styled in a severe, elegant sweep back from her face. Her makeup was subtle but sharp, emphasizing the determined set of her jaw and the cold fire in her grey eyes. She held a leather portfolio in one hand, and her posture was ramrod straight. She looked taller, formidable. She was not his wife. She was a CEO, a predator. Rick shot to his feet, his mind racing. Was this a joke, a sting operation? Had she followed him? Did she know about Chloe? His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of panic. "Eleanor!" He stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. What are you doing here?" She didn't look at him. Her gaze swept over the room, cool and appraising. She gave a slight nod to Mr. Harrison, who looked as if he might faint, and then her eyes landed on Julian Croft. "Julian," she said, and her voice was a revelation. It was the voice she used with staff, but sharpened to a diamond's edge. Clear, cold, and utterly entournement. "Is everyone present?" "Everyone who matters, Madam Chairwoman." Julian Croft replied, his tone now filled with a deep, unwavering respect. "Madam Chairwoman." The words hung in the air, electric and incomprehensible. Rick stared at his wife, his mind struggling to connect the dots. The anonymous consortium. The controlling interest in the Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group. The new chairwoman. Eleanor finally turned her eyes on him. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of the woman who had shared his bed for 25 years. Her gaze was that of a superior officer inspecting a junior subordinate who had committed a grievous error. "Richard," she said, the name sounding foreign and formal on her lips. "I see you received my invitation. Please sit. We have a great deal to discuss." She walked to the head of the table, the seat he had taken, and stood there waiting. Her silent command was absolute. Mortified, his face burning with a confusion and shame so profound it felt like a physical illness. Rick stumbled back and took the chair to her right, the seat of a subordinate. Eleanor placed her portfolio on the table and opened it. She looked around at the small assembly. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice ringing with an authority he had never heard before. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eleanor Vance, and as of 9:00 a.m. this morning, I am the new majority shareholder and acting chairwoman of the board for the Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group." Rick felt the blood drain from his face. Eleanor Vance. She hadn't used her maiden name professionally since the day they were married. It was a name he had absorbed into his own, a footnote in the story of sterling legacy properties. But he was wrong. He was so terribly, catastrophically wrong. The footnote, it turned out, was the real headline, and he was just the fine print. The silence that followed Eleanor's declaration was so absolute that Rick could hear the frantic thumping of his own pulse in his ears. It was a roaring, panicked sound that drowned out everything else. He stared at his wife, this stranger in an Armani suit, and his world tilted on its axis. Every certainty he had built his life upon his power, his control, his understanding of his own marriage, crumbled into dust. "Chairwoman." He finally managed to croak the word, feeling like sandpaper in his throat. "Eleanor, what is this? Is this some kind of elaborate joke?" Eleanor didn't even grant him a direct glance. She addressed her next words to Julian Croft, her voice as crisp as a starched collar. "Julian, perhaps you could clarify the situation for my husband. He seems to be under some misapprehension." The subtle emphasis she placed on husband was a scalpel deftly cutting him down. It reframed their relationship not as a partnership, but as a mere biographical detail, one that was currently an inconvenience. Julian Croft stepped forward, his expression impassive. "There is no joke, Mr. Sterling. Upon his passing, Marcus Vance's entire portfolio, including his 58% controlling stake in Vance Sovereign Hospitality, was transferred from his private trust into a new one. The sole beneficiary and trustee of that new trust is his daughter, Eleanor Vance. Rick's mind reeled. But that's impossible. Marcus hated me. He all but disowned Eleanor when she married me. His will was public knowledge. He left his fortune to a foundation for stray cats. It was true. The old man, a titan of industry, as ruthless as he was eccentric, had made his disapproval of Rick painfully clear. He saw Rick as a flashy upstart, a real estate developer who built glass boxes, while Marcus Vance built legacies of stone and velvet. The public reading of his will had been a final posthumous insult, leaving his vast empire to the Marcus Vance Foundation for Feline Welfare, a move that had been ridiculed and celebrated in equal measure across the financial world. A faint, chilling smile touched Eleanor's lips for the first time. It was a victor's smile. My father was a complicated man, Richard. He enjoyed his theatre. The foundation was a smokescreen, a masterpiece of misdirection to keep vultures like you from circling what he truly valued. She paused, letting the insult land with surgical precision. He knew you would never see me as anything more than an accessory. He counted on it. He trusted that your arrogance would be the best shield for his true legacy. Her eyes finally locked with his, and the cold fury in them was terrifying. And he was right. Mr. Harrison, the general manager, cleared his throat nervously. Madam Chairwoman, the regional executives are waiting on a secure line for your introductory address. Thank you, David, Eleanor said, her attention shifting effortlessly to business. Patch them through to the conference screen in 5 minutes, and have a pot of Darjeeling tea brought to me. No sugar. She then looked back at Julian. Was there any other preliminary business? Just one item, Julian said, opening his own briefcase. He slid a single thick document across the polished table towards Rick. Per the instructions of the new chairwoman, we have conducted a preliminary review of all potential third-party partnerships. This includes the proposal submitted by Sterling Legacy Properties. Rick stared at the document. It was his own proposal, the one he had been so confident about, the one he thought he was here to discuss as a prospective partner. Now it lay on the table like evidence at a trial. My invitation here, it wasn't to join the board, was it? Rick asked, the sickening realization dawning on him. Don't be absurd, Eleanor said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. I invited you here to this hotel, to this room, for one reason: efficiency. I prefer to handle all my unpleasant business on the same day. And terminating this proposal is, I assure you, an unpleasant business. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the cover page of his proposal. Sterling Legacy Properties is over-leveraged. Your debt-to-asset ratio is alarming. You're facing liquidity issues on the Hudson Yards project, and you were counting on this partnership as a backdoor bailout. You were hoping to use my family's capital to save your failing company. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling the facade of his success with an expert's knowledge. How could she know that he had buried the Hudson Yards problem under layers of creative accounting? He had told no one. How was all he could manage. I may have been arranging flowers, Richard, but I wasn't deaf or stupid, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. I read every financial report you left on your desk. I listened to every hushed phone call you took in your study. I have been watching you gamble with our future for 5 years. The difference is, you thought it was your future. You forgot that half of it was legally mine. She leaned forward slightly, the predator closing in. And as for the Vance legacy that was never yours to even touch, my father may not have approved of my choice of husband, but he never stopped believing I was his daughter. He spent the last 10 years of his life secretly teaching me everything he knew. Every Thursday afternoon when you were at your Rotary Club lunch, or perhaps with your latest intern, I was in a downtown office with him and a team of forensic accountants learning how to spot a charlatan like you from a mile away. The revelation was staggering. Her quiet life, her garden clubs, her charity work. It had all been a cover. A long, patient, brilliantly executed deception. She hadn't been a quiet wife. She had been a queen in exile biding her time. His thoughts suddenly flashed to Chloe upstairs in the imperial suite, drinking vintage wine, waiting for him. The absurdity, the sheer pathetic cliché of it all hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had been playing checkers while his wife was mastering three-dimensional chess. So let's be clear, Eleanor continued, her voice rising again to its commanding boardroom tone. The Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group is not interested in a partnership with Sterling Legacy Properties. In fact, we consider your company's current financial instability to be a potential threat to the market. Consider this your official notice. She stood up, the meeting for her clearly concluded. Julian will handle the formal rejection. David, walk me to the penthouse office. I want to see the view my father loved so much. As she started to walk past him, Rick, in a desperate last-ditch effort, reached out and grabbed her arm. Eleanor, please. We need to talk. About us. She stopped. Slowly, she looked down at his hand on her arm with an expression of profound disgust, as if he were something she'd scraped off her shoe. She didn't pull away. She simply waited. Take your hand off me, Richard, she said, her voice soft but laced with venom. You are in my hotel, in my boardroom, and you are wasting my time. The conversation about us was over the moment you signed the hotel register with a woman named Chloe Summers. She knew. Of course she knew. She knew everything. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. Eleanor straightened her sleeve and without a backward glance swept out of the room, leaving behind a silence thick with the ashes of a man's life. Rick Sterling, the titan of industry, sank back into his chair, utterly and completely defeated. The king had been checkmated by the queen he never even knew was in the game. The penthouse office of the Ethelgard Grand was Marcus Vance's sanctuary. It was a world away from the mahogany and leather of the downstairs meeting rooms. The space was modern minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a godlike 180-degree view of Central Park. It was a room that declared without speaking a word that its occupant was above the fray, observing the world from a position of unassailable power. Eleanor walked to the center of the room and stood before the vast expanse of glass. Her reflection, a stark silhouette against the sprawling green of the park and the glittering city beyond. For the first time since she had entered the Concord room, the iron mask of control slipped just for a moment. A deep, shuddering breath escaped her lips. She closed her eyes, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. Julian Croft entered the office behind her, closing the door softly. He approached not as a lawyer, but as the old family friend he was. He taught you well, Marcus, Julian said quietly, standing a respectful distance away. He would have been immensely proud of you today. Eleanor wiped the tear away with an angry, swift motion. He would have been furious I let it go on this long, she countered, her voice thick with emotion. He would have called me a fool for wasting 25 years on a man who saw me as nothing more than a well-bred broodmare. He would have called you patient, Julian corrected gently. Marcus understood the long game better than anyone. He knew that revenge is a dish best served cold, but power is a legacy best built slowly and in secret. He didn't want you to be a mere heiress, Eleanor. He wanted you to be a ruler, and rulers need to understand their terrain before they conquer it. The story of her secret apprenticeship was one of quiet rebellion and profound love. After her marriage to Rick, Marcus Vance had, as Rick believed, all but cut her off. The public arguments were legendary. The disinheritance was his final dramatic act of public disapproval. But it was all a ruse. The Thursday art history lectures she supposedly attended at the Met were in fact clandestine meetings with her father. In a nondescript office building on Wall Street, far from the prying eyes of society gossips and corporate Siebtum, Marcus Vance had downloaded his entire life's work into his daughter's mind. He brought in his most trusted allies, lawyers like Julian forensic accountants and ruthless M&A specialists. They didn't teach her about hotel management in the traditional sense. They taught her about corporate warfare. They taught her how to read a balance sheet to find the lies hidden between the numbers. They taught her the art of the leveraged buyout, the poison pill defense, the proxy battle. They taught her how to dissect a man's ego and use it as a weapon against him. I still remember the first day, Eleanor murmured, her gaze distant. He sat me down with the financials for a rival hotel chain. He said, forget the thread count of the sheets and the quality of the champagne. That's for managers. You are an owner. An owner only needs to know one thing: where is the weakness? For 10 years, she had lived a double life. In Greenwich, she was Mrs. Richard Sterling, the epitome of grace and domesticity. She planned charity galas, cultivated her award-winning roses, and played the part of the supportive, oblivious wife. But every Thursday, she would shed that skin and become Eleanor Vance, her father's protégée. Absorbing decades of wisdom, her mind becoming a fortress of corporate strategy. Her father's final illness had been swift and merciless. In his last lucid moments, he had made her promise 2 things. First, he had rasped his powerful voice, reduced to a fragile whisper. Never sell. The Æthelgard is not a building. It is a symbol. It is the heart of our family. I won't, Papa, she had promised, tears streaming down her face. Second, he'd continued, his eyes fixing on her with a final burning intensity. When the time comes, do not wound the snake. You cut off its head. Show him. Show all of them what a Vance is truly made of. After his death, Julian Croft had activated the plan they had meticulously crafted years before. The public will leaving everything to the Cat Foundation was executed with great fanfare. It was a brilliant piece of legal misdirection that was entirely legitimate, but told only a fraction of the story. The real assets, the controlling shares of Vance Sovereign Hospitality, were held in a series of offshore trusts and holding companies so complex they resembled a spider's web. The trigger for their consolidation and transfer to Eleanor was a single clause in the final trust document it would execute 6 months after his death on a date of her choosing. She had chosen today, August 27th, her 25th wedding anniversary. The initial reports from the regional heads are in, Julian said, bringing her back to the present. He handed her a tablet. The transition has been seamless. The board is consolidated. Your position is unassailable. Eleanor scrolled through the reports, her mind already shifting from the personal to the professional. The emotion was being packed away, locked in a vault. The chairwoman was taking over again. What's the status on Sterling's financials? She asked, her tone all business. Just as you suspected, Julian confirmed. His Hudson Yards project is a black hole. He's been shuffling funds from his more stable commercial properties to cover the hemorrhaging losses, but he's running out of road. He secured a bridge loan from a private equity firm, Blackwood Capital, but the terms are predatory. He defaults in 90 days if he can't secure a major infusion of capital. Blackwood Capital, Eleanor mused. That's Alistair Finch's outfit, a shark who smells blood a mile away. She looked up from the tablet, a new, colder determination in her eyes. Alistair owes me a favour. My father's endorsement got his first fund off the ground. What are you thinking, Eleanor? Julian asked, though he already knew. He recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same look Marcus Vance used to get right before a hostile takeover. Richard came to my company for a bailout, she said. He won't get one. But a predator never leaves a wounded animal to die of natural causes. That's inefficient. She walked over to the massive rosewood desk that had been her father's and sat in the chair. It felt right. She looked out at the city, her city now, and a plan began to form, cold, calculated, and utterly devastating. Julian, she said, her voice dropping to the register of command. Get me Alistair Finch on the phone, and then I want you to start drawing up the paperwork. I'm not interested in a partnership with Sterling Legacy Properties. She paused, looking at the name on a gold-plated placard on the desk, Marcus Vance. I'm interested in an acquisition. Back in the Imperial Suite, the 82 Petrus sat half-finished on the coffee table, its luxurious promise now tasting like ash in Rick's mouth. The decadent spread of food was untouched. The magnificent view of Central Park, which had seemed like a testament to his power an hour ago, now felt like a cruel mockery. The city outside was oblivious, humming with life and commerce, while inside this gilded cage, his world had imploded. He paced the length of the suite, his Tom Ford jacket discarded on a chair, his tie loosened. He had replayed the scene in the Concord room 12 times in his head, each replay more humiliating than the last. Eleanor's cold eyes, her new commanding voice, the way she had used her maiden name like a weapon, Madam Chairwoman. The title echoed in his skull, a death knell for the life he knew. His first instinct was to call her to try and fix this. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over her name, Eleanor. It seemed so inadequate now. He pressed the call button. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. Her familiar, gentle voice greeted him. You've reached Eleanor. Please leave a message. It was the voice of the wife he thought he knew, a ghost, from a life that no longer existed. He hung up without leaving a message. What could he possibly say? He tried again this time, calling her private line at the house. The housekeeper answered. The Sterling residence. It's Richard, Martha. Is Eleanor there? He asked, his voice strained. No, Mr. Sterling. Mrs. Sterling left this morning. She said she'd be staying in the city for the foreseeable future. She left a package for you with security at the front gate. For the foreseeable future. The words were a slam of a door in his face. A package. He could only imagine what it contained. Divorce papers, probably. Or maybe just the keys to the Greenwich house, a clear signal that he was no longer welcome. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. This wasn't just about his marriage. His entire empire was on the line. Eleanor knew about Hudson Yards. She knew about his liquidity problems. Her statement, "We consider your company's current financial instability to be a potential threat to the market," was not just a rejection, it was a threat. If word of that got out, his lenders would panic. His credit lines would be frozen, and Blackwood Capital would descend upon him like a pack of wolves. He needed to get ahead of this. He dialed his CFO, Mark Renshaw. "Rick, I thought you were in meetings all weekend," Mark said, his voice casual. "Change of plans," Rick snapped. "Listen to me, and listen carefully. I want a complete lockdown on all our financials. No one, and I mean no one, talks to the press or any outside analysts. We need to project absolute stability. Put out a press release first thing Monday morning. Announce a new fictional expansion project. Something big. International. We need to look strong." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Rick, what's going on? Is this about the Vance Group deal? I thought that was a sure thing." "The deal is dead," Rick gritted out. "And it's worse than that. The new chairwoman of Vance Sovereign it's Eleanor." Mark was silent for a full 10 seconds. "Eleanor, your Eleanor." "Yes, my Eleanor," Rick yelled, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Just do what I said." Mark locked down complete radio silence. He hung up, his breathing ragged. He felt the walls of the suite closing in. He was trapped. It was then that the bedroom door opened. Chloe emerged, wrapped in a fluffy Ethelgard robe, a champagne flute in her hand. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright. She was still living in the movie, oblivious that the script had been torched. "Hey, you," she said, her voice a seductive purr. "That was a long meeting. Did you buy the whole company?" Rick stared at her. At her youth, her naivete, her transactional affection. An hour ago, she had been a symbol of his power and freedom. Now she looked like a liability, a grotesque living monument to his own stupidity. The affair wasn't just an infidelity. It was a catastrophic business miscalculation. He had brought his own Trojan horse into the enemy's citadel. "Get dressed," he said, his voice flat and dead. Chloe's smile faltered. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," he muttered. "The ghost of my entire future. We're leaving. Now." "Leaving? But we just got here. You said we had the whole weekend." She whined, the petulant tone that he usually found charming, now grating on his raw nerves. "The weekend is cancelled," he snarled, turning on her with a fury that made her flinch. "The acquisition fell through. The hotel is compromised." "Compromised? What are you talking about?" she asked, her confusion turning to fear. "Rick, you're scaring me." He didn't have the energy to explain the sheer magnitude of the disaster. How could he explain that the quiet, elegant woman she had probably seen in photos and dismissed as a society wife was now the most dangerous person in his life? "Just pack your things, Chloe," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "It's over." As Chloe scurried back into the bedroom, her fantasy weekend dissolving into a nightmare, Rick walked to the window. He looked down at the city below. The people looked like ants, all scurrying along their own paths, unaware of the Titan who was about to fall from the sky. He had built his name, his legacy, on being the smartest man in the room. He anticipated market shifts. He exploited his rivals' weaknesses. He was always 10 steps ahead. But he had lived for 25 years with a woman whose true identity he had never even bothered to investigate. He had underestimated her, ignored her, and in doing so had handed her the very sword she was now holding to his throat. The cracks in the Sterling Empire were no longer just financial. They were foundational. They ran right through his home, his marriage, and his own colossal ego. And as he stood there, watching the sun begin to dip below the horizon, he had the terrifying premonition that Eleanor was not just going to let him fall. She was going to push him. The ride back to Chloe's trendy but soulless apartment in Chelsea was a silent, suffocating affair. The comfortable luxury of the Rolls-Royce now felt like a tomb. Rick stared blankly out the window, his mind a maelstrom of panic and regret, while Chloe sat rigidly on the opposite side of the plush leather seat, smart enough to know that any attempt at conversation would be met with a volatile response. When the car pulled up outside her building, Rick didn't move. "I'll have your things sent over from Greenwich tomorrow," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. It was a dismissal. Chloe's head snapped towards him, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning fury. "That's it? You're just dumping me? After all this? After all your promises?" "The promises were based on a reality that no longer exists," he said coldly. "The game has changed, Chloe, and you're not a player." "I'm not a player," she scoffed, her voice rising. "I'm the reason you're in this mess. You brought me to her hotel, you idiot. You paraded me right in front of her. Don't you think I have some value in this? Don't you think she'd pay to know the details of your sordid little life?" It was a clumsy threat born of desperation, but it struck a nerve. He turned to look at her. His eyes narrowed. "Don't be a fool. You're an insect to her. A gnat. The affair is irrelevant now. This is business. You have nothing she wants." "I have you," she shot back, her voice cracking. "I have your secrets. I have a year's worth of your texts, your emails, your pathetic, lonely late-night calls. Do you really think your precious brand can survive that kind of scandal right now, on top of everything else?" He almost laughed. "My brand. My brand was just executed in a boardroom by my wife. What you have is kindling for a bonfire. It's meaningless. Now get out of the car." Tears of rage and humiliation streamed down Chloe's face. She had bet everything on this man, on this life. She had seen herself as the next Mrs. Sterling. Now she was being discarded like a piece of trash. Her ambition, curdling into pure spite, gave her a final, reckless idea. If the king wouldn't pay, maybe the queen would. She got out of the car without another word and slammed the door. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away, she took out her phone, her hands shaking. She didn't have Eleanor's number, but she was resourceful. A quick search brought up the main number for the Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group's corporate headquarters. 2 days later, Eleanor was in her father's, now her office, deep in a meeting with her new acquisitions team. They were mapping out the vulnerabilities of Sterling legacy properties, preparing for a corporate raid of breathtaking speed and precision. Her focus was absolute. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Madam Chairwoman, I apologize for the interruption. There is a Miss Chloe Summers in the lobby. She insists on speaking with you. She claims it is a deeply personal matter." Eleanor's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something amusement, perhaps, or contempt passed through her eyes. The gnat had come to buzz at her window. "Thank you, Sarah," Eleanor said calmly. "Send her in." Her acquisitions team looked at her surprised. "Are you sure?" one of them asked. "Perfectly," Eleanor replied. "Let's take a 15-minute break. I believe this falls under the category of opposition research." Chloe was escorted into the cavernous office. She had clearly put a lot of thought into her appearance, opting not for a seductive dress, but for a sophisticated, albeit ill-fitting business-style outfit. She was trying to present herself as a serious person, an equal. The effect was that of a child playing dress-up. She clutched her designer handbag like a shield, her bravado from 2 days ago replaced by a visible nervousness now that she was face-to-face with the Queen in her throne room. "Mrs. Sterling," Chloe began, her voice trying for a firmness it didn't possess. "I mean, Miss Vance." "You can call me Madam Chairwoman," Eleanor said, not unkindly, but with a tone that instantly established the immense gulf between them. She did not stand or offer a seat. She remained behind her vast desk, a symbol of untouchable authority. "You have 5 minutes. My time is valuable." Thrown off balance, Chloe rushed into her poorly conceived plan. "I'm here to discuss Richard. What he's done to both of us. He lied to me, just like he lied to you. I have information things you could use against him. In your divorce." Eleanor listened patiently, her hands steepled before her, her expression unreadable. "I have records," Chloe continued, gaining a bit of false confidence. "Texts, photos from our trips, voicemails. He told me he loved me. He promised he would leave you. I thought it was only fair that you see the full extent of his betrayal. For a price, of course. Consider it compensation for my emotional distress." When Chloe finished, the silence in the office was heavy. Eleanor stared at her for a long moment, her gaze analytical, as if she were examining a specimen under a microscope. "Let me see if I understand this," Eleanor said finally, her voice soft but deadly. "My husband, a man of questionable judgment, began an affair with a woman of questionable character. He then brought this woman to my hotel on our anniversary, as part of a weekend that was meant to be the culmination of his plan to defraud my family's company. Now, having been discarded by him after his plan spectacularly failed, you have come to me, the woman you were sleeping with my husband behind my back, to sell me the sordid details of the affair." She paused, letting the pathetic summary hang in the air. "Have I missed anything?" Chloe's face turned pale. "When you put it like that, I can't imagine putting it any other way," Eleanor cut in sharply. "Let me explain something to you, Miss Summers, because you seem to be operating under a very flawed set of assumptions. You assume that you are a player in this drama, that your affair was the cause of my actions. You are mistaken." She stood up and walked to the window looking out over the park. "You are not the disease, Miss Summers. You are a symptom. You are a cliché. You are the kind of cheap, predictable, short-term gratification a man like my husband seeks when he is terrified of his own mediocrity. He didn't turn to you because he stopped loving me. He turned to you because he stopped respecting himself." She turned back to face Chloe, her eyes blazing with cold fire. "You think your texts and photos are a weapon. My weapon is a $9 billion hospitality empire and a team of the most ruthless corporate lawyers in New York. You are offering to sell me a pocket knife while I am preparing to launch a nuclear strike." She walked back to her desk and pressed the intercom button. "Sarah, please show Miss Summers out." Chloe was frozen in place, utterly humiliated. "But your 5 minutes are up," Eleanor said, sitting down and picking up a financial report, her attention already elsewhere. "I would advise you to find a new benefactor, Miss Summers, because the Sterling account is about to be permanently closed. Oh, and one more thing." She looked up one last time, her expression one of final, absolute dismissal. "If you or anyone associated with you ever attempts to contact me or my company again, I will instruct my legal team to destroy you. Not for the affair, I truly don't care, but for the sheer audacity of wasting my time. Is that clear?" Stunned into silence, Chloe could only nod. She turned and practically fled the office, the quiet click of the closing door sealing her complete and utter irrelevance. Eleanor did not watch her go. She was already back at work, dismantling her husband's empire one calculated move at a time. The gnat had been swatted. 30 days later, the final act played out in the main boardroom of the Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group. At the head of a monolithic black marble table sat Eleanor, flanked by her formidable board. At the far end, looking haggard and utterly defeated, was Richard Sterling. In the preceding month, his empire had crumbled. Strategic leaks orchestrated by Eleanor's team had caused his stock to plummet and lenders to panic. He was here as a last resort to beg. He made a weak, desperate plea for the Vance Group to acquire his company's debt and save him from ruin. "The underlying assets are still valuable," he argued, his voice raspy. "It's a temporary cash flow crisis." Eleanor listened with cold patience before nodding to her CFO. The woman delivered a brutal clinical assessment. "The portfolio is a house of cards leveraged to the hilt. We project Sterling Legacy Properties will be insolvent within 6 weeks. Taking on their debt would be fiscally irresponsible." Eleanor's voice cut through the silence. "The board has unanimously rejected your proposal." Rick slumped in his chair. "So you'll just let me fall," he whispered. "What you built," Eleanor corrected her voice, sharp with personal history, "was a mirage built on my family's name and my inheritance. You used my credibility as your collateral." She paused, letting the truth settle before delivering the coup de grace. "However, we are prepared to make you an alternative offer." A flicker of hope ignited in Rick's eyes as Julian Croft slid a single document down the table. "An LLC, Vance Strategic Holdings, offers to buy Sterling Legacy Properties in its entirety," Julian stated. "They will assume all debts. The purchase price is $1. Rick stared at the paper, the words blurring. "Vance Strategic Holdings." Eleanor's lips curved into a chilling smile. "That would be me. A private fund I established last week. I am not interested in saving your company, Richard. I am interested in owning its carcass. I will absorb the viable assets and liquidate the rest." She stood, her authority absolute. "You have 24 hours to accept. Otherwise, we let your creditors tear you apart. This is the only offer that lets you walk away without personal bankruptcy." She looked at him one last time, her voice a soft, final judgment. "You always talked about your legacy. Congratulations, Richard. You are about to become a footnote in mine." She swept from the room, leaving him alone with his ruin. He picked up the pen, his hand shaking, and signed away his entire world for a single dollar. And so Richard Sterling vanished from the world of high finance. He walked away with nothing but the clothes on his back and the crushing weight of his own arrogance. His name was stripped from the buildings he built, his reputation erased. Chloe Summers faded back into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in the lounges of New York. But Eleanor Vance, her star had just begun to rise. She transformed the Vance Sovereign Group into a global powerhouse, her name synonymous with integrity, intelligence, and ruthless strength. She proved that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful, and that underestimating someone is the most dangerous mistake you can ever make. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of reclamation, of a woman taking back her name, her power, and her destiny. What did you think of Eleanor's ultimate move? Was it brilliant justice or cold-hearted revenge? Let me know in the comments below. If you love stories where the underdog comes out on top with a brilliant twist, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible, real-life dramas. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.